And good Friday afternoon. My name is Ryan Belmore. I'm the owner and publisher of WhatsUpNewp. Frank Prosnitz joins me. And hey, Frank, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing all right. And we also have a very special guest this afternoon, and that is Greg Howard. Hey, Greg.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. How are you?
Hi, Greg. How you doing?
Good, Frank. Good afternoon.
It is a beautiful day, and well, let me introduce Greg. Greg is a police detective in Stonington, Connecticut. Been policing for 20 some odd years, and recently elected last November to the Connecticut legislature, where he has been. I've gotten to know Greg a little bit, and I've been impressed. I've been impressed that Greg really has done something that we have. It's a breath of fresh air, if you will, and learning how to work across the aisle and work with other people, regardless of political affiliation, and to be able to get things done. And one of the areas you're dealing with is some legislation dealing with policing itself. Um, Let me ask you. Well, let me jump to a different subject first, and COVID and how you feel that the state of Connecticut has been able to handle it, and in terms of their actually bring things back up to normal a little bit quicker than Rhode Island.
So it's interesting you say that. I just left a press conference with the governor at the Mystic Aquarium where we spoke exactly about that, about Connecticut's recovery efforts and lifting restrictions. And I think that all in all, the governor has done a good job of balancing it. In the legislature and in government, we always talk about balance. So he was faced with a balance of the economy, our children and their education, mental health, and of course the virus that proved to be deadly for several people in the state of Connecticut. So I do think he's moving in the right direction. But I think it's important to note one of the main reasons for that is because the infrastructure that we put together here in Connecticut, as far as rolling out vaccines and education, and most importantly, the cooperation of the residents of the state of Connecticut, in the amount of, I think we have 60% of our population, that's age eligible, vaccinated now. So really moving in a great direction in that regard. In fact, we're at a point now where the supply is outweighing the demand. So I think that that's a key component that the governor has had working in his favor.
I wanted to jump right to the policing stuff and just get your general reaction to, as a police detective, to the Chauvin verdict and to the incidents that have unfortunately surrounded that.
Yeah, so the Chauvin verdict, I always say that our criminal justice system is not perfect, but to have a free society, you're going to have a criminal justice system that at times is not perfect. But I do believe in it. I trust in it, and he was entitled to a due process of law and a jury of his peers, which he was entitled to. And they have their findings, and their findings are what they are. So I support our system. I do think that Derek Chauvin's actions, and again, I always qualify this by saying I didn't watch the entire trial, so I certainly don't have all of the information, but I did see enough body cam evidence to tell you that I had great concerns with his actions on that day. I think it was well beyond what was reasonably necessary. In police work, we say objective reasonableness, that amount of force which is reasonable and necessary to complete the sentence, protect yourself, protect a third party, effect an arrest. And it was well beyond that. His actions were not in keeping with any training I've ever received or the training that goes on in the state of Connecticut. So by all accounts, as far as I'm concerned, he had a fair trial, and he's got to pay his debt to society.
So within short order, in a community just north of there, police officer apparently mistakenly pulls out a gun instead of a taser, and another young man is dead as a result of it. How does that happen, and where is that a result of poor training or panic? How does that happen?
It's difficult, Frank, to get into the head of each individual person. Every police officer responds their way. I don't know the training that goes on necessarily in Minnesota, but I will say this. The body cam footage that I saw, I heard her say taser, 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 and then immediately, say, with a bit of shock that she fired a weapon. Speculation on my part in 19 years of police work, what I think may have happened. And again, pure speculation is, as this suspect is going back to his vehicle. she draws her firearm and then realizes that it's, because she can't see what he's going to, perhaps, and again, speculation, draws her firearm to be able to respond to a gun coming out, and then is able to see that he doesn't have that. In her mind, processes taser is appropriate here and never transitions back to her taser, which would, of course, be a training issue. But again, we're responsible for our training. The agency trains you, but you are responsible for your actions as well. So I'm not willing to make a jump to say that that was intentional. That would have to been pretty well planned, the way that she immediately responded to it. I think there's a training issue there, and certainly unfortunate anytime somebody loses their life, no matter what. But that would be my best speculation.
Put us in the head of a police officer that is on a stop. Somebody there's a warrant out. It's not for any violent crime. They try to elude police, or they try to resist arrest. What are the emotions that a police officer feels? Do they feel fear? Is it a sense of being right? Is there a sense of maybe disabling the individual as opposed to killing the individual?
So there's that's an onion with several layers. But let me say this to you. Oftentimes, at least in my experience, my emotional response to an incident comes after. So something happens, I immediately respond in the moment, and then afterwards it's like, wow, what just happened, sort of thing, because things happen very, very quickly, and that's when you rely on your training. But if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I'm going to say something to you that I like to say every chance I get. A police officer, when they pull over a car, they don't know the difference between Frank Prosnitz, who's being pulled over for speeding, is going to take his ticket and go on with his day.
Never happened.
and somebody who perhaps maybe committed an armed robbery 4 towns over and feels that the officer somehow knows that and is going to take a shot at him and kill him. Now, remember, you only get one life, right? So you're gambling with your life every time you walk up to that car. So I often ask officers, how do you know the difference between, the Frank Prosnitz who's going to take his ticket and the guy that's looking to kill you? And they all say, I don't. And then I respond and say, okay, how do you treat everybody then? They say, well, I treat them with extreme caution until I know otherwise, which I think is a pretty fair assessment. You know that I have 2 children I'm very, very, very proud of, and I love dearly, and my wife, and I want to make it home to them. And I think everybody wants to go home at the end of the day. So then I say to the officer, okay, that's sensible, and I believe it's sensible. And then I say to him, well, let me ask you this. How many police officers have you, how many people have you stopped that had an out taillight or didn't use their turn signal, and they literally have no idea why you pulled them over? And they say, well, several. Okay. So, and that's important to know. So keep that in your mind. And now put yourself in 2021 in the skin of a 19-year-old black male who's watched everything he's seen on TV, and he's being pulled over, and he doesn't know why. He doesn't know his taillight's out. He doesn't know that he was speeding. He doesn't know he crossed the center line or didn't use his turn signal or whatever. How is he supposed to differentiate Greg Howard from Derek Chauvin? And the answer is he can't. And he just wants to go home too. So we're police officer or not, or whoever you are, we all experience that same sort of response to what we believe may be a confrontational encounter. And I think that the onus is on the police officer to, in police municipalities or agencies, to train officers to recognize the difference between somebody who's being combative and somebody who's scared, and to be able to act accordingly and say, okay, I can see this gentleman's hands. He's yelling, he's screaming, he's accusing me of being a racist. I need to calm him down. Now, if he starts reaching other places and makes other statements, we're having a different conversation. And at the same time, encourage the public trust to say, you can trust those blue lights that are behind you. And that's going to take time. And it's going to take a lot of work on both sides of the discussion to get there. But I think we all need to recognize that everybody just wants to go home safely at the end of the day.
Greg, I hate to use this moment for driver's ed, but perhaps we can take a moment and remind people what they should do. What eases everything from the officer that has pulled you over? What can help in this scenario?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Certainly officers are trained to watch your hands. That is really, really important thing. You hear the term furtive movements, and people start jostling around. It gets our nerves up, and you have to understand. If you guys get a chance, I'll tell you, if you YouTube zooming to progress, you'll see myself and another police officer and a few other guys who happen to be from some from town where I live, which is predominantly white, and some from an area that are that's much more urban. A couple of guys are of color, a couple of guys are white, and we break down a police encounter on a car stop, and we give the perspective of the police officer, at least myself and the other officer do, and the other four guys give a perspective of what the other person is doing and what are they interpreting, right, Ryan? So I think it speaks to your question. And the answer to the question from a police perspective, I expect to get to the what we call the B post, which would be the the back side of your door, if you will, and be able to see your hands and be able to communicate with you as to what move you're making. So if I ask for your license, and you say to me it's behind my wallet, I'm going to grab it, to understand what's going on, that would keep things down. That's the police perspective. But you do have a segment of society that feels, okay, even if I'm cooperative with the police, they could still hurt me. So I just want to go home, and I'm willing to risk the arrest just to make sure I go home. So I go back to what I said before, that I think the onus is on both. Now, police officers shudder when I say this. I often would shake hands on car stops, often. And it's a big risk because somebody grabs hold of you and takes off, now you're being dragged. And if their grip is stronger than your ability to pull away, which oftentimes it is, you're in big trouble. So I would try to make good assessments at that. And I would always communicate with people right off the rip why I pulled them over, unless something was happening rapidly. But I do see sometimes where you have drivers who say, "Why was I stopped?" So I'll tell you when you give me your license. All right, we don't need to get into this back and forth. This is America. You're driving down the road. They've been stopped by a branch of the government, and they want an explanation. They're entitled to it. So give it to them. And that, in my experience, 99% of the time, calm right down, because now they know why they're being stopped and they accept it, and we can go forward from there.
How do you respond to communities? And Stonington is one of them that is hiring, or in the case of rezoning, rehiring a social work type individual to work with the police department in terms of situations that perhaps police officers are not quite as familiar with.
So again, police officers, I used to work with an old police officer years ago. He called us the miscellaneous department, right? We cover what nobody else does by the nature of the fact that we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there is a segment of the society that will often look to government, one form or another, to solve all of their problems, okay? And so there are times when a social worker is probably best suited, provided they're available. And there are other times, there's been countless times in my career where a social worker will call us because somebody's called 211, which is, mobile outreach, or, the helpline in Connecticut, and a couple of social workers show up and they can't get the situation under control. And unfortunately, because nobody likes to say this, but unfortunately, sometimes force is the only way to do it. There's been scenarios where a social worker will say, don't use any force to get him into the ambulance. He needs to go to the hospital. What do you want me to do? You're the social worker. You're the clinician. You've already tried everything else. How are we going to get him in there? You think I'm not suddenly going to be able to talk him into it? I mean, maybe I can, but you see the irony there, and that's what happens. So we have in Connecticut, and there's a bill before the legislature right now to expand upon this, a certification, if you will, called Crisis Intervention Training, or CIT. And it's a 40-hour class where police officers are specially trained in crisis intervention. Crisis means somebody who has a mental illness or an underlying addiction or something, and in that moment they're not functioning in a way that's safe for them or everybody else. So in other words, living with mental illness doesn't mean you're in crisis, but living with mental illness and having a psychotic break, now you're in crisis. So to expand upon our crisis intervention program, which is a very interesting story, by the way, was which run by CABLE, the Connecticut Alliance to Benefit Law Enforcement, which was founded and run by a woman named Louise Pyers. And the story that makes it so interesting is a police sergeant went to stop her son one day after an incident. I'll save the whole story. And he came at the officer with I think it was an edged weapon. It might have been a bottle, broken bottle, something. And he got so close, the officer felt his life was in danger, and he shot the young man. And the man survived, and the man was Louise Pyers' son. And Louise Pyers saw fit then to say, well, we need to really do a better job. And she has that officer teaching her class. What a great story, right? So everybody recognized the problem. They worked together for a solution, and we're working towards that in Connecticut now to expand the crisis intervention program by consolidating at the Municipal Basic Academy some of the other classes that we do that are sort of offsets of cable, and bring it all into one so that every officer has the cable training, with the important recognition to understand that there are officers you send to calls and there are officers you don't send to calls, because we are an eclectic group of people, and some of us are great at talking people down and are very friendly and gregarious and compassionate, and others don't have those sort of innate qualities to talk to people, but they're phenomenal at other things, investigations, etc. So to keep the people on the CIT team that are appropriate, but I would give everybody the training so when they're suddenly in that moment, they have the background to understand.
Greg, I know you're involved with developing legislation in Connecticut in terms of, I don't want to call it police reform, but at least in policing. What are some of those things that are happening?
So there's a huge bill, 70 some pages, 40 some odd sections, that was passed last summer in response to the George Floyd incident. And there was, so let me talk about the great things that happened in that bill. There was a mandated body cams for every police officer in Connecticut, but for the fiscal note, which is expensive, but I think worth it. I talk about in the legislature all the time spending good money, and to have that camera there does two great things. It provides accountability for our police, who, by the way, as a patriot and a conservative constitutionalist myself, the police departments or the police agencies are one of the single greatest risks to our system of government from a fundamental standpoint, because they're an armed branch of the government with authority in all your neighborhoods. So it's important to keep them checked. So to have those body cams to keep our police officers in check, I think is huge. But I also think it limits a lot of liability for municipalities and the state when you talk about state police and state police agencies like UConn, DEMAS, et cetera, because more often than not, the body cam actually exonerates an officer from an accusation of wrongdoing. So I think it's important there. So that was a great thing. Mental health checks for officers is a great thing. That was in the police bill. And the drug test, that was another thing. Again, but for the fiscal note, and the only drug test that's really expensive is a steroid test, but the rest of them are fairly cheap. But again, you're given a human being a firearm, multiple firearms, and the authority to unilaterally make a decision to take somebody's life within the confines of the law. Nobody else can do that, right? Judges can't do that on their own. They have to have a jury, etc. So you're giving them that authority. That with great authority comes great responsibility. Police officers are the only profession in the state that's subject to a polygraph to be hired. You have to sit with an investigator and tell them everything you've done in your life, all of your thoughts, etc., while hooked up to a lie detector test. So it's important that we get good officers. So those were some of many really good things in the bill, and I highlight a few. Two of the major problems in the bill, though, was in the way of use of force. So in the past, police officers were trained in what we call justifiable use of force. So you get a Graham-Connor standard or Tennessee Garner standard, and you're basically taught, if the suspect does this, then you're justified to do this. Okay, except it doesn't make it necessarily the right decision, right? So we've already in Connecticut, prior to the passage of 6004, have made an adjustment to say, all right, this is the scenario, what are the possible outcomes, and what's the best situation, and how do you interpret all that in nanoseconds? All right, so we don't have an incident like you spoke about with the taser, with the accident, with the shooting in place of the taser. So we were having that shift, but what they did in that legislation was they took out the Graham v. Connor standard from the Supreme Court and allowed it so that officers could be, that the objective reasonableness of their action could be judged based on information that became available later. So for example, if I were to yell to somebody, hey, stop, and he doesn't stop, and then I grab him and say, well, he didn't respond to verbal commands, and later it's determined he's deaf, they can use that against me. And I thought that was a bit unfair to hold somebody accountable for information they didn't have. So we did fix that. That was one thing that's already been done. The governor signed it. The next thing is consent searches. And consent searches, what people think about is, well, you pull somebody over and you say, can I search your car? Or you stop them walking down the road, can I search you? And sure, indeed that happens. But it happens in a lot of other ways too. So for example, if somebody is a victim of a burglary and we get a DNA swab from somebody who, say, cut themselves on the way in or something, we need exemplar swabs from the homeowner. Well, you have to do that with consent, and right now we can't do that. So it's significantly impairing several investigations. So there is a bill that, in fact, I rewrote those 2 consent searches sections and put safeguards in there to make sure that officers were not relying upon race to solicit consent, and made sure they had, or fishing expeditions, and made sure they had adequate information and there was a legitimate reason for the request. And that made it on judiciary, and it sits before the Senate looking to be called right now. So
I see a lot of, we hear the term defund police, but I think that that's a misnomer, since it really refers to maybe more community policing, if you will.
Mhm.
What's been the response or from police officers? I mean, I also see a lot that say police in this country feel that they're under attack, and that they're the victims of these things. What's been the general reaction from police that, obviously only from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I think that what you're seeing is a nationwide decline in recruitment because of the current culture. I think that the culture, or the way that many are going about it, is unfair. It is frustrating. And Frank, you know me, I've been at this job for 19 years, and you know the type of person that I am.
Right.
To have my son come home and say, hey, I'm being told that you're a racist and a murderer because you're a police officer, that's unfair to me. I don't think that that's the way to go about it. I drive down the road, not so much now, it's sort of calmed down, but back in the summer, people flipping me the bird. And that's frustrating when I do what I do for the community. And I can certainly understand that and the danger. But I also think that when you talk about defund the police, folks have to understand that you need a police department. I mean, to suggest otherwise is lunacy. And in fact, what you're seeing now, just in Stonington, we had 2 fatal accidents in the last week. And if you look at traffic stops and infractions and motor vehicle enforcement, it's down hundreds of percents, because the officers are of the, and you can't blame them for this, they're of the mindset that no matter what I do, it's going to be wrong. I'll do nothing, and that way nobody can get to me. And they're doing nothing. So speeding is up, use of cell phones is up, driving erratically is up, and we're having fatal accidents. And those 2 things are related. Is it easy to quantify that? Probably not. But I mean, it does seem related to me. So when you talk about defund the police, and I say to folks, well, okay, I understand what you mean. You're not saying to, get rid of the police department, but you're saying to take funds, say, in Stonington, and allocate them to human services for social programs instead of having police response. And I guess I understand that. And then people say to me, well, how come with Stonington Police Department, I'll make the number up, so I don't know off the top of my head, is $5 million a year, and yet human services only $1 million. We need to reallocate the funds over there. Well, that's fine, except that you're taking out the fact that all of these agencies are run by people who have to work, and they get paid for that. So the police department is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's going to be 4 to 5 times more expensive to run just in personnel alone than human services. And the reason they're able to do that is because if you have an issue that you need human services for, you make an appointment, you go. So if the people in Stonington want to start making, appointments to have car accidents and domestics, etc., okay, maybe we can readjust it, but that's unreasonable. We have, by the nature of police response in any emergency service, sometimes you have too many people working and sometimes you don't have enough, and you just try to balance that. So when you look at that whole broad spectrum, I think that there is definitely, again, and I think you opened with this, we always look to see the one right answer, the Republican answer, the Democratic answer. And in fact, most of the time they're both correct, but the real right answer is a combination of the 2. So in some instances, yes, more proactive, preventative stuff on the front end is better, but in some cases you still need the reactive phase of it too, because it's not always going to work.
Greg, just
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, just a couple more quick questions. One, I'd like you to talk a little bit about your involvement in the community, because I think if a lot of police officers were more involved in their community and people got to know them as individuals, we might have a different perspective, or some people might. And I take a look at that police force north of Minneapolis. What was it? Brooklyn, whatever.
Center or something like that. Yeah.
Not one police officer on that force lived in the community or lives in the community. That seems to be really problematic because you're out there coaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how successful you are as a coach, but you're out there coaching, and I know you, and I know that and I see how people interact with you. It's not Detective Greg Howard. It's Greg Howard. He's my neighbor. He's my friend. He's a guy in the community, and he happens to be a police officer doing his job. That seems to be the really cool way of doing that. Do we have enough of that? Should we be requiring people to live in their communities, to be active in their communities, or encouraging them to be active?
I think what we should, I don't think requiring people to do things often works well. I think what we should be doing is doing a better job of recruiting those types of people and making police work something that a guy like that is able to come and say, hey, I want to be part of something, instead of saying, hey, it's just not worth it. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Frank, in 4 months, there's been moments in time where I think being a legislator is just not worth it. I mean, I'm constantly getting berated, and, and I tell the young officers, you have to drown out, and I tell my football players too, we have to starve distractions and feed our focus. So to answer your first question, I do a lot in the community. I started volunteering in EMS when I was 14 years old in 1995. And, stayed in EMS for a long time. And then I became a police officer. Within a year, I moved from Westerly to Stonington, one town over. But, and then I run my youth football program. And I'll tell you this, which, by the way, a quick plug on that. I'm very happy about my program. Frank knows we do it, Ryan, completely play for free. A few years ago, we decided that, it's $140 for a kid to play football, or a girl to cheer, or boy to cheer sometimes. It was too much, and these kids needed the mentorship. So myself and a few other parents, we work very hard every year to raise $28,000 per year to run our program, and we do it successfully, and it's had monumental impact on several children in the last few years already. So, and
it's super important. I used to play Pop Warner in Rhode Island, and we used to come over the line and play in Stonington way back when, all the time. And if it's free, it gets a whole lot more people involved, and then
it does.
Involved.
Yeah. It's true. And you jump back to Connecticut, Frank. You talked about Minnesota, but I was in when I did my methods of instruction training. When you become a police instructor, they don't teach you police work. You already know that. They teach you how to teach, and the guy that teaches that class is a retired teacher himself, right? That's sensible. So he, at the beginning of the class, it's a couple-week class, you stand up and you say who you are and what you do and this and that. And he said this to me, and it was several years ago, and I never forgot it. To the class, he said, your profession, far and away, does more for kids in their community outside of police, outside of their work, than any other profession I know. Because 1 out of every 3 guys that stood up said, oh, I'm a coach, I'm a Boy Scout leader, I'm this, I'm that. And so I think that those things are important. And I think that when you talk about me as an individual, it's been very beneficial throughout my career. And I've had officers, even in my own PD, say to me, well, you don't understand, when you show up, people just comply. Well, they see me for me. They know Greg Howard. They've known me for a long time. They know what they're going to get, and they know they're getting arrested, but they know they're getting a fair shake. And it goes back to what I said earlier. Their fear has gone down. They're not afraid of getting hurt. They're not afraid of getting mistreated. They're not happy that they get arrested, but they're not going to give Greg Howard a hard time, because they don't want to do that to Greg Howard, because they're going to see Greg Howard at the ball field and in the grocery store. And a lot of officers take issue with that because they don't want to be approached at the grocery store or wherever. And, Shayna says often, wherever Greg goes is a lobster trap. It's very easy to get in, very difficult to get out, because he's always talking to this one, always talking to that one. And that was long before I had any aspirations for a political office. So, but it's who I am as a person, and I do agree with you wholeheartedly that police officers should be embedded in their community, but to force it is probably not the best way. I think the best way is to go back to making police officers the finest. We used to say that, Stonington's finest, and really go out and get the finest, whether they have a degree or not, the finest, good charactered people, and we could teach them the rest.
Greg, first of all, I just want I want to thank you. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but I do want to do want to say this, and I've gotten to know you over the last probably year or so, and have come to admire you for a couple of standpoints. Your involvement in community, your thoughts about policing, and maybe more importantly, your thoughts about governing. That you have that rare touch of being able to cross the aisle and work on solutions rather than caring about getting elected the next time. And so we need more Greg Howards out there in every community. But and thank you for what I think has been a really great discussion this morning.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for your kind words. And like I said, when you talk about reaching across the aisle, I'll tell you, Ryan.
Greg, I want to make sure first. Did that help me in case I go into Stonington that I won't get arrested?
Yeah, you'll be all right. You'll be all right.
Nobody's ever asked him that. Yeah.
I tell people all the time, my sons, Ryan, are my world. They're 11 and 10, and they want to be like their dad, right? So what a tremendous responsibility to have, because they're watching. So I always know when I go home that I have to face them. I don't care what the Republican leadership said. I don't care what the Democratic said, and even the constituents. I care what they say, but ultimately those boys are holding me accountable, and they don't even realize it. But because I have to answer to them, and I tell them sometimes, because they're smart and they see things that get said and whatnot. And I said, boys, when you walk down the street, where does Daddy always tell you to be? On the sidewalk, right side or left side, don't matter. Safe on the side. You go in the middle, you get run over a lot. So, when it comes to politics, I hang out in the middle and I get run over a lot, but it's all right. I keep getting up, and I'm grateful, Frank, when you say those things, because it continues to encourage me past the, is it worth it phase. And I continue to say, yes, it is worth it. And I'll continue on as long as the 43rd district will have me.
Very good.
And we've had a lot of friends from the Newport area end up in Stonington, Mystic, North Stonington. And if you haven't already brought the boys and the family, there used to be a restaurant called Rosemary and Thyme here in Newport, and it was a bakery. Very, very popular, but they moved to North Stonington. And they have a little farm shack now on, I'm going to get this, Pendleton Hill Road in North Stonington. Wildbriar's Family Farm. Matt and Anna are up there. They had a coffee shop bakery, extremely popular. I encourage anybody who's watching this, head over to North Stonington. It's just a short skip from Stonington, and great little bakery.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I appreciate it. North Stonington's got great little spots like that. Mystic, my district's big. I have 90 square miles in my district, but between the two towns, and Mystic has got a lot of great restaurants and tourism attractions, and Pawcatuck's got its little places. And North Stonington has, I just said today at the aquarium we were talking about, it's like sometimes walking into 1950, and it's just such a great experience up there, and such a wonderful town with great people.
That's it. Frank, one more time, do you want to tell people where you can normally hear you and Greg talk and the schedule?
So Greg is on my radio show in Wesley on WBLQ. We're on, he comes on at 8 o'clock every first and third Thursday, except when there's a 5 Thursday month. When he happens to pop in.
Yeah, here I am.
It was great. Greg was on yesterday. We didn't know whether he was coming in there, came in through the door, which was great. And we had a nice discussion. Greg will be on next Thursday morning. And it's always a pleasure. It's in fact, I get, just so you know, Greg, I get a lot of good feedback for those sessions. We talk about a lot of good issues.
Great. Good. I'm glad to know.
Excellent. Well, Greg, thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you so much. You guys have a great weekend.
Thank you.
You too. As well. And not far away, 90 square miles. That's almost the size of Rhode Island.
Yeah, maybe double.
It might be. But an important and good conversation to have this afternoon.
Yeah. So now we're just going to take a break.
We are going to take what do we have here? About a 24-minute break. And we will be back here at 2 p.m. with General Treasurer Seth Magazine.
Very good. I'll see you very shortly.
All right. I will see you then. And on behalf of Frank Prosnitz, as well as myself, as well as all of us here at WhatsUpNewp, I want to thank Greg for joining us today. Important conversations. Be sure to share with your friends, family, and everyone else out there. The video is available now on WhatsUpNewp.com.